think we're ready to get started, Dr. Bernard.
Okay. I say good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our third webinar series today, where we're talking about cultivating trauma-informed spaces to support success. This is a very serious topic, and we really hope that you will engage with us today. Our theme for the year is to collaborate, cultivate, and motivate. And one thing we can't do is we work together for the success of this organization and changing the spaces that we work in is confuse uncomfortability with not being safe. And I really want to emphasize that this is a safe space because we're all working for the betterment of the industry and each other to ensure that we have a future through our youth. So it's going to be a great conversation, I know. And I'm really, really looking forward to hearing our presentation today with our presenters, as well as getting feedback and questions, excuse me, from our partners, from our supporters, members, and friends. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Oh, excuse me, sorry. So Dr. Ebony.
Thank you, Dr. Bernard. And good evening, everyone. I'm Ebony Weber, and I serve as the Chief Operating Officer for MANRRS here at our headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. And thank you for taking time this evening to join us for this very lively discussion tonight. I'm joined tonight by two of my fellow co-panelists who I would like for them to introduce themselves. Mr. Butler.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carl Butler. I'm with Network Ag. I've been involved with MANRRS for umpteen years. I actually got involved with MANRRS in 1994, and I've been involved ever since. So I've been MANRRSized. So I've served in various capacities with the MANRRS organization, and at the core of everything that I've been wanting to do or have done with MANRRS has been centered around students. And so proud to be here to provide my input on this very important topic.
Thank you, Carl. Ms. Porter.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Tiara Porter. I'm the Transfer Student Support Specialist for the Wisconsin Institute for Science Education and Community Engagement at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and also a current senior PhD student studying educational policy at UW-Madison as well. And I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, we're going to get ready and get started here. So let me pull up and share my screen. And I think we'll have it all figured out by now, as long as we've been doing some.
Okay.
So today we're going to start off talking about a brief overview of trauma-informed care and really get into a discussion, but we wanted to make sure that we can set the groundwork so that everyone at least have some basic understanding of the discussion that we're talking about tonight. Unfortunately, Dr. Katrina Roach was unable to join us, so we're going to be filling in for her and moving forward. So if you have any questions, definitely begin putting those in Q&A, and we hope to be able to get through those, as we really do want this to be a discussion tonight and not just us presenting to you. So first, starting off, what is trauma? I know a lot of times we hear this word. It's one of those buzzwords that you kind of hear in the news a lot of time. You know, people talk about being triggered, a lot of trauma that's taking place, especially since COVID. And so knowing of those things, trauma by definition is exposure to an incident or series of events that is emotionally or physically harmful or life-threatening, and that has a lasting adverse effects on the individual's well-being. I know that's very technical. These things could include physical, sexual, emotional abuse, childhood neglect, having a family member with mental health or substance use abuse, violence in the community, natural or human-made disasters, sudden or unexplained separation, poverty and discrimination. But a lot of things that we see from day to day, I know recently over the news, and especially an example of the killing of George Floyd and witnessing those type of things are all trauma-like events. And just because it doesn't necessarily happen directly to you, I don't want you to necessarily confuse that you did not experience a traumatizing event. So definitely want to bring some attention to that. What populations are more at risk for experiencing trauma? Typically, these are people that are from historically marginalized populations, appear to have a disproportionately higher prevalence of trauma. And I'm sure that goes back to just generation of oppression and discriminatory practices and things that we've had to overcome as being a minoritized group. People living in low income communities, ethnic and racial minorities, LGBTQ individuals with disabilities, and of course, women and girls. I will also, put here as well, based off my experience, it's African-American males. There has also been a group that has been targeted from a lot of different vantage points, whether that's police brutality, whether it's Black on Black crime. So it's definitely been a group that has experienced high levels of trauma. And I'd like to add that to the list as well. Carl, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Ebony. Good evening again, everyone. And I'm going to just discuss a couple more things here. And the first thing that comes to mind, how does exposure to trauma affect an individual's health? Exposure to trauma has been linked to adverse outcomes, including obesity, heart disease, cancer, lung disease, and liver disease, viral hepatitis, autoimmune disease, sexually transmitted infections, and depression, suicide, alcoholism, drug abuse, and smoking. All of these things here create what we call a very toxic situation. It begins to wear on the body. When we talk about trauma, it has an initial impact, but then there's a lingering effect. And a lot of times in the scientific world, we call it toxicity, that are the results of trauma. Could you pass it on to the next slide, please, Ebony? The 4 R's of trauma-informed organizational practices. When we talk about organizations or programs, there are what we call the 4R components that are related to that. Number one here, it realizes a widespread impact of trauma and understand potential path for recovery, recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, family, staff, and other involved with the system. Responds to fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices. And the last one is resistance to re-traumatization actively. I will pass this back on to Ms. Tierra. Would you mind taking over to review the next couple slides?
There we go. Thanks, Carl. So now we will go on and discuss the 6 key principles of trauma-informed care. The first one, which is arguably the most important, is going to be safety. Students and anyone throughout the organization really needs to feel as though they are physically and psychologically safe. And then building on that, the way to build that safety is in order to have trustworthiness and transparency. All decisions should be conducted with the goal of building and maintaining trust throughout the organization, specifically mutually between those that are receiving services and providing the services as well. The third key principle is peer support and mutual self-help. Without a team that is supportive and also educated, there's no real way to build trust, establish safety, and empower the individual as well in a trauma-informed practice strategy. So that is super important. And then the fourth one is collaboration and utility. So here you need to recognize that healing happens in relationships, and there needs to be shared power and decision-making. There needs to be a recognition that everyone has a role to play in creating a trauma-informed plan and creating a trauma-informed approach. You don't have to be a therapist or be therapeutic in order to provide support and be able to be collaborative in this manner. The fifth one is having an empowered voice and also having an empowered choice. The organization and the administration really needs to be able to strengthen the individual's experience. They need to be able to strengthen their ability to create choices and support them in those choices, and also recognize that everyone's experience is unique and requires an individualized approach in order to have a individualized, tailored empowerment plan for people undergoing trauma. And then the last principle is that there are cultural, historical, and gender issues. Having a trauma-informed care plan is a very nuanced approach, and it needs to be very personalized and individualized. However, it's important that those that are implementing the plan are able to move past cultural stereotypes. They're able to be culturally responsive mentors, professionals, individuals, and that they can also recognize and address historical trauma. I think that's one of the big things, is that they not only need to be able to be aware of it, but they need to be able to address it and also make sure that the person experiencing the trauma is heard and taken into account with those issues. Okay, next slide, Minnie. Great. So one of the things that really needs to happen is there needs to be structural, systemic, organizational shifts in order to reorient the entire culture so that you have the potential to be able to be aware and create strategic plans for trauma-informed practices. And so what really needs to happen is individuals, administrators need to lead and communicate about being trauma-informed. And there needs to be a specific organizational plan put in place that not only the staff knows, but also that the patients or the students or whoever is receiving the care knows about as well. Training is very instrumental here. You need to be able to not only recognize, but reorient and then create an action plan for those undergoing trauma and for trauma-informed practices. And in turn, if you have the proper training and awareness, you know how to create a safe physical, emotional, mental. There are so many other environments that are needed for the proper well-being and healing through trauma. And there also needs to be training to prevent any secondary traumatic stress as well. Anything when there's a trauma situation, it is easily passed on to other individuals. Other individuals can be absorbed by it. And so there needs to also be practices and things in place to prevent secondary trauma, and overall strive towards building a trauma-informed workforce where awareness and action are key.
Thank you for that. And so now we get to really get into some of the questions and the discussion. So again, attendees that are out in the audience, please, if you have any questions, if you have any experiences, feel free to put those in question or in the chat where we're able to share those and maybe provide any insight to any thoughts you all may have. Okay, so we're going to get here to the questions. I'm going to stop sharing there. Look at our questions here. And so to kick us off, so why is trauma-informed practices important, and how do you implement trauma-informed practices in your work? And I'm going to start with you, Ms. Porter, since you're coming from an education perspective.
Yeah, so coming from an education perspective, most trauma-informed practice plans and strategies have actually been implemented at the K-12 level, but there is no plan for it in higher education, and there's really a great need for it. Professors, administrators, staff, they need really to be equipped with the skills not only to recognize trauma, but to also then be able to have established strategies in place to respond and support students. Ebony, you mentioned, I mean, there have been so many hits of trauma from the racial pandemic, from COVID-19, from having to learn online. Like it doesn't just look a certain way. Trauma manifests in a lot of different ways. It can be emotional, it can be physical. A student could be withdrawn. You have to consider your mental well-being. And I think a lot of times student behaviors that are really obviously traumatic to those that have the training are brushed under the table or ignored by people that don't know it. They're like, this is just bad behavior. They don't pay attention in my class. They're always withdrawn. They're spaced out. They never talk. They sleep in my class. But I think in higher education, it's become a very like sterile, strict environment that lacks understanding and compassion. It's almost like this unidirectional thing, like I'm the professor, I teach you, but there's no reciprocation on how the student feels and how there's an open space to talk about that. And so I think that professors and people in education just don't understand what the constant hits of trauma and challenges, how those manifest, and really ignoring those traumas only exacerbates past traumas. Not acknowledging them and not giving them a space really only makes a problem worse. And so I think that in higher education specifically, it requires that all staff, administrator, faculty, they need to be trained in trauma-informed practices. And even being a culturally responsive professor, a mentor, what does that look like? An advisor, if you're a graduate student, right? Like, these students need to be supported, they need to be empowered, they need to feel self-worth, they need to feel stability and safety. And I think not every higher education environment really strives to ensure that all of those are in place. So I think that's really how it's important in education. And it's starting to be a little bit implemented in my work, but nowhere near the capacity that it could be or it should be.
And then just a follow-up question, I'm sure those resources that are available to students on campus, they probably vary depending on the type of institution and particularly if they have those type of offices available for multicultural students and things. I know many of the large land grant universities that have them, but I'm not sure how that shows up if you're at these different types of institutions.
Yeah, definitely. I think even some of the land grant ones are slacking too, but
yeah, for sure. Carl, and I'll just repeat the question. It was like, why is trauma-informed practices important, and how do you implement trauma-informed practices in your work? And I know that you come from a government as well as an industry perspective.
Yeah, well, one of the things here, I oftentimes when I'm talking to individuals and this whole new, what I call post-George Foreman era, there's a renewed interest in really listening and understanding people. And one of the key things to think about, and you mentioned and we talked about how trauma affects individuals in so many different ways. And so oftentimes, this is one of my sayings, and I often say it here all the time. I call it my walk, my experiences, my path, my choices, my journey, and my heart. That's all mixed into this bowl of understanding. And I think what's important is that there be open communication. And the question that's in my mind, do we treat trauma-informed situation as a mental problem? And I don't know, but it falls into the category for all the things that we talk about in terms of actually treating mental problems, in terms of looking at solutions to put the person in a better place. And one thing to remember is that we all need space to grow as well as heal. And so it's important from the environment that we work in, the cultural environment, all of these things that we have to take under consideration as we begin to look at the individuals. And the thing about it, when we talk about trauma, we can't look at it from a holistic or one size fit all. It has to be from an individual perspective in terms of how do we address and deal with the situation. An individual who's actually experiencing the problems or the trauma related situation. And at the center of all of that is really talking about understanding. And the whole thing, when we talk about understanding, this is really understanding individuals. And as I talked about my walk, my journey, my heart, the whole gamut, it's all about really understanding that individual and coming up with something, a very customized approach to helping that person heal and getting them the resources and the supports that's really needed for them to get to a better place in terms of the results of the situation that they've gone through. And there are a number of things that we can look at, particularly when you look at the workplace. And to be realistic and think about it, we spend more time in the workplace than we really do in our personal life, because when you look at and factor in, excuse me, the time it takes to prepare and get ready and go to work, and you're with your colleagues all day long. So you basically spend more time with your coworkers or colleagues than you really do at home in a lot of cases. And so part of this whole healing process and dealing and addressing with that is really focusing on the environment. Is the environment inclusive? Does it have inclusive practices that the employer actually presents and puts on the table that will allow that individual, regardless of their background, differences, and so forth, allow that individual to come as their whole self and feel accepted and included in terms of what's going on? Do whatever this individual brings to the table, is it valued, appreciated, is it heard? Then there's a big question. We all want to be, do you see me? Do you hear me in the workplace? These things are all very important and that we have to talk about. And so one of the key components is really creating a very inclusive environment, a work environment or space where people can feel they belong, regardless of what they bring or whatever they say is baggage or whatever it may be due to whatever the circumstances. We must create a situation where individuals can feel like they belong. And in doing so, we're creating an environment where we are promoting cooperative situations where it's supportive. And above all of that, we want to create a situation where folks feel empowered in the workplace and so forth. I'll stop on those comments because I know there may be others who want to chime in or bring some additional comments.
Yep. Thank you, Karen. We are
Okay.
going to pivot a little bit so we can answer some of the questions from the audience, because we did mention we want this to be, as much as a conversation as it can be, given that you all can't talk for yourselves. So that's my job. But I do think you all touched on some very great points in terms of being inclusive and creating those safe places. I know we have a very small team here at the national office. And when in the height of COVID, when we were expanding our team, I mean, we used to come to our weekly calls and just spend moments of our meeting just kind of talking about how we felt and how people were dealing with things, and and how that anxiety was kicking in from being at home, or just kind of the social unrest that was taking place in many cities. And so it was very therapeutic. We always used to say, like, we were having our therapy sessions every week, because we were just able to kind of share and relate in our frustrations and challenges. And it was really rewarding. So thank you for touching on that. So getting to some of the questions from the audience. Patricia Jepson, thank you, Patricia, for your question is, can you share strategies to become aware of the student's trauma if they are hesitant to let you know? So I'm not sure, Tiara, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, so I think one of the best ways is being able to create a space for students to take up, right? Like, I think it's really important that if you are a professor, you say, like, this is straight up just time to come in and talk about whatever. Like, being able to have that said, it has to be said rather than implied. I think it could even be something that you discuss everywhere from on the first day of class repeatedly throughout the semester, something even built into your syllabus. Like, if you feel this type of way, if you need to come talk about this. I think designating a space and actually having, like, manufacturing a space, which is something that you could do with just you one-on-one with the student, or just, this is a time and a place and a physical space that you can come and get a break, or to, talk about things, go through your emotions, being able to express it and just start to work towards those steps. And I think that kind of goes also with the other 6 practices too, is something as simple as that can help a student feel empowered, can help a student feel like, okay, I have a grasp on things and I can start to move towards things. And then it's also important for you too, if you are going to implement those strategies, that you also are gathering support with your administration and support with your colleagues, so that it isn't just like a one-person effort in that regard. I think being able to holistically create that space for students in general is really important, but can be manifested in a lot of different ways. It could be something as simple as, here's 30 minutes or an hour, I'm here with coffee. We don't have to talk about classwork. We don't have to talk about lab, just like almost like an out plan. Like, you can leave and detach and have a space to work on that. Yeah, I think hopefully that answers your question, but I think that's a good first step.
Yeah, I think that's great. And so just to kind of recap, you just, like, if you create a genuine, if you manufacture the space and make the student feel comfortable enough, then when they're ready, they will share with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Carl, did you want to add anything before we move to the next
Yes.
question? Okay.
Yes, I think this whole component around a safe space is so important. But one of the things here that I often think about when we look at our students who actually go into this whole ag space, this whole agricultural thing for a lot of them is really new. They're aware of the opportunities, and they migrate to this area because they've heard of the opportunities. But in actuality, a lot of our students come to this whole ag space behind. And they come in and they actually have the ability and amplitude and everything else to catch up. And majority of them actually do. But what's important is the culture that exists around them, the environment. What is the environment like? And I know we have a lot of individual efforts around, the culture of this organization does not reflect me. However, the culture of the organization is a sum total of all the cultures that exist and how this surfaces. And so it's important that we actually create, and again, I say this whole thing about a very inclusive environment. But the other challenge, kids come in, what if you're an introvert? How do you actually begin to deal with those types of situations? The key thing is really communication. Some things that may potentially actually work is in the workplace or even at the institution, if there is a way that you can actually create I call it the secret box or something where individuals can actually put their problems or concerns in there and they not be revealed as an individual who are actually behind that. Sending subliminal messages all the time in terms of the messaging around those types of issues or things that students may possibly be exposed to or experiencing. And I think those things are really helpful in terms of actually doing that, creating that space where they can actually thrive and grow.
Thank you for that. We're gonna jump to another question from Renee that really is coming from an employer standpoint. So could you please provide some examples of inclusive practices employers could implement? And Carl, I'll let you start with this one first.
Okay, inclusive practices. Number one here, the workplace. It must be fair. Employees must create, or managers and supervisors must create a situation where individuals are actually treated or feel that they're treated fair. So what does that actually mean? When we talk about fair, you want to make sure if individuals are doing well and performing well, they're rewarded and recognized. But by the same token, we need to also ensure that we are dealing with poor performers or individuals who are not going to meet what's actually needed. And the other thing here is when we start talking about we could actually even look at support. Support is so important across the board. Understanding the dynamics and the trauma and all of the other things here, and a management or leadership must focus on things in terms of ensuring that they are approaching the individuals, trying to address their needs. And then the other thing here is we want to talk about cooperative. And when we talk about being cooperative in the workplace, is that you want to actually be able to create a situation where you're working with the employee to understand the dynamics that they deal with, and also working with them to bring solutions to the table. Not only bringing the solutions to the table, but allowing those solutions or that they bring to the table to be executed or given proper consideration. It may be such that, well, you may be onto something, but it may not necessarily be there, but allowing that individual to feel that whatever they're bringing to the table is given proper consideration. And then I had mentioned earlier about the whole thing around empowerment. That's the ultimate. You want to be able to give the employees or create a situation for the employees, regardless of the situation, where they have the tools and the support that's needed for them to get the job done. And that you're not really just riding them out or just micromanaging the situation, but giving them that opportunity to just really be able to thrive and do what's necessary in that inclusive workplace. And then there's another component about being open, demonstrating a sense of transparency. I think that's important, being transparent in the workplace. One of the things here that I've been accused of in working on my team is that I'm so predictable. You know, they just know how I'm going to respond. And I think that's a good thing in a lot of aspects. But for others, they may feel somewhat a little intimidated by that. So they do things to kind of throw people off to say, well, they're not going to figure out what I'm going to do. But my thing, that whole thing around transparency is so important, and being open, that's important as well. So I would say fair, open, cooperative, supportive, and empowering. Those are the 5 what we call inclusive habits that really are the foundation of an organization, and allowing the whole person to bring themselves to work and demonstrate diversity.
Yeah. Tiara, did you want to add anything to that answer?
Nope, Carl
Oh.
said it perfect.
Perfect. And I would just add to that, I think what a lot of companies, I think one thing, Renee, to just remember, inclusive practices starts with include. So just try to include as many perspectives on anything that you're doing, and it will, I think, inevitably create an inclusive environment just by having more voices, more eyes, more perspectives that's able to weigh in on the situation. It has always worked for our team. We're able to get together a pretty diverse team from government, industry, academia, NGOs, people from across the country, and just the more diverse and the more perspectives you have, it's kind of like boiler testing any idea. You're just able to just kind of think through a lot more scenarios and create a more robust solution. But thank you for your question, Renee. Let's see what else we have here for the audience. And you guys, please keep your questions coming. These are great and giving us additional conversation for tonight. I definitely want to go to this one from Jael. Apologies if I pronounced your name wrong. How can student leaders support fellow students and create spaces that acknowledge and heal trauma? Ms. Porter, I'll let you start with this question. How
Yeah,
can
sorry. Can you repeat the question? Oh, no, you were just doing what I was asking.
Okay, no problem. How can student leaders support fellow students and create spaces that acknowledge and heal trauma?
Yeah, I think being aware and being an ally. I think supporting other students by being able to listen to them, being able to support their need for space, being willing to understand where the trauma comes from, where the emotions are rooted from, why this has caused trauma in the first place. And I think being able to understand that and being able to be an advocate for another student that may not, the thing is, like, some students don't even know that they're going through trauma. Like we've been in a real trauma intense situation for a few years. And I think a lot of students and even other people in academia get really numb to that, and they don't even recognize it as trauma anymore. So I think being able to recognize and understand where the trauma is coming from and being an outward advocate and ally for that person, being able to be a space for that person to say things that they want to say, being able to just get together and you all just can rant, you know. And I think students have the ability to create really informal, close networks that faculty and other administrators just don't get. I think that there is more of a level of just pure peer support. I think it means something, and I mean, I think it hits different when it comes from a student itself than implementing those same strategies, and if you were to be a faculty or an administrator even. So I think all of those 6 different practices that we talked about are also applicable from student to student, from staff to student, from staff to staff, from faculty. You know, I think it goes all across the different levels. But yeah, I think just being able to be understanding and being able to really try and get at and see where that's coming from, and also recognizing that some things that you don't realize day to day are giving trauma. So.
And I would just add to your point, Tiara, I think as student leaders, and especially if you're on campus, I think it's knowing where the resources are. So being resourceful where you can point people to the right direction, or, you know, you can connect them to the correct professional staff or to the correct community resources. So I definitely think, just kind of being that person, like, hey, go to Miss Porter. She's going to know where to point you. So even if you're not, this doesn't feel like your field, or to Miss Porter's point, you may not know or understand how to help someone in a trauma intense situation, but being resourceful and being a person to know where to go to get help is just as important. So definitely as a student leader, know where those student support places are on campus and be able to point students to those instances when they need help. Okay. Carl, anything else you want to add on that point?
Well, one thing here, what's key is networking. Networking is so important. And, I just kind of look at my journey and where I'm now age-wise. I feel somewhat disconnected from students in the sense that I'm at that point where my influence is not that heavily. Students, what I call near peers, actually have a greater influence. But in the mix of all of that networking, I think one of the things that's really important for the success of our students is mentoring. All of our students should have at least one mentor. I think it's so important, and not necessarily just have a mentor, but a mentor-mentee relationship. And what that does is it allows you to really experience your life ahead. Well, experience your life ahead of time, because that mentor can kind of bridge you on that work, that life experience, things that you're about to experience. So I think that's important. Then the other thing is near peer. And when I say that, the whole component around having someone, there's a greater relatability. If, for example, if you're a freshman or sophomore in school, and if you have someone who's most recent graduate, or that are, a mentee that's maybe 18 or 19 years old, it'll be good to maybe have what I call a near peer mentor, someone who's maybe 22 or 23 years, who's just a little bit ahead of them. And I think that student would be more in tune to communicating and feeling more comfortable communicating with that individual than someone who's actually out in the workplace. And so I think that's something definitely to actually consider in that. And really, I think the other thing here is that as students, we often think about it when you're young, you say, well, I've got so much time ahead of me that I have time to figure it out and get it together here. But in this journey, it's all about remembering that your purpose is really greater than some amount of the challenges that you have. Be positive about the situation. That's okay, I'm going through something difficult and tough, but you will be able to get through it in due time. Just be steadfast and stay strong, and rely on people around you to support you and get you through whatever it is that you're going through.
Thank you for those points. We have a really, I like the next two questions or / scenarios, because it gets to change up the conversation a little bit. John Locke says that he is a white man who co-advises the MANRRS Club at his university, and he's worried about his ability to create a safe space for people of marginalized communities. Do you have any advice? And I would definitely yield to the panelists to speak first. So either one of you want to take that first?
Well, I'll go ahead and go first then. That's a great question, and it's not uncommon to be in that type of situation here. But the key thing here is building trust. Mm-hmm. And it also goes back to that whole notion of empowering the members of that organization. And then the other thing that will be really helpful is actually identifying individuals to engage in your chapter that students can look at and see themselves in. That's diversity, is helping them to identify individuals. You can identify individuals that they can see themselves through in terms of a vision for their life or their career, or things that they want to actually do. And so I think those things are really important from that perspective, being able to actually do that. The other thing here is communication. Focus on communication. And one of the things here that I often do and talk to students is really get to know who you are. Understand your communication style, which is very important. I was dealing with a couple issues here, and it all centered around communication. Understanding each other's communication style. All of that really plays into the mix. And one of the things I would encourage students, if you have not, really begin to understand your personality profile, why you are the way you are. And there are so many books written, and I know we challenge ourselves all the time to be different, but really there's not a lot that separates us. But it's so important to really understand who you are. Understanding your communication style will wreak havoc, and it will actually create so many opportunities by basically understanding that. So those are just a couple little tidbits that I would like to offer.
Thank you, Carl. Tiara, you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say ask. Like I would ask, and then I would listen, and then I would take action on that. I think a lot of times people will ask and then they don't listen, and then the ask it seems really hollow. It seems like you're trying to create an ingenuine space. And so I think, like Carl mentioned, being able to have that communication and being able to have that trust, being able to have that sort of relationship where you can ask them and then they tell you honestly, and then you are able to then take that and put it to action and put it to use, would be my only extra things that I would add for what Carl said.
Yep. And so I have, I see Wanda is providing some comments in the chat as well. She says she can relate, being she has been one of our longtime advisors as Oregon State, and think former or had a current former advisor of the year. And so I think to the panelist point, I think creating a genuine safe space, everyone feels genuineness. And so I think as long as you're genuine in your intentions to move forward and create that space, have that open and transparent communication with your student leaders. And I think the other part Carl mentioned was important is allowing them to get to know you as a person. So irregardless of you being a white man, they know that John Luck is for them and for inclusion and for diversity. And I think being a white man is less important, and it becomes more of hopefully a strong suit, like, hey, John, can you go get more of you and bring them over here to our organization? And so it may become advantageous benefit for you, but otherwise, I think that would be my advice. And we've had a lot of successful white advisors to stay quite some time and be very impactful in their student lives. So good luck to you this year.
Yeah. Ebony, I want to add one other thing while you're pulling up the next question. Feedback. John, I think what's key to you is actually getting feedback. I implemented a training program, and it was new. I was new in the space of actually even conducting training of that nature. And I created a survey. And what happened with the survey is that I was able to take the feedback that I was getting and immediately implementing it. And now, based on survey over a couple of years, I got to a point where my survey now has outlived its usefulness. So now I have to create another avenue. And so what's important is students actually giving you their feedback, and more so giving you feedback, and how do you take that feedback and put it into an actionable plan that will benefit them. You're delivering, they're bringing things to you and you're delivering on. And so that will add to them respecting you in the position that you bring, and also demonstrates that you do care and you're listening to them. Yes.
Yeah, those are great, excellent additional points.
Yeah, great point, Carl, with the feedback.
So there was an anonymous comment, and I think they were describing their work environment and may want some advice on how to deal with the situation, as there wasn't necessarily a question, but say, hello, I work in corporate America in the field of HR. I was heavily traumatized by the events that took place in 2020, and yet I go into work on a daily basis on site in the middle of COVID and all the social unrest. I do effectively communicate and safely communicate to our managers and peers about how we were feeling and still feel at this time. So I'm not sure if they're saying just expressing how, over these past few years, to your point earlier, that we've kind of been living in this traumatized state that we've kind of somehow normalized. And how she may just be experiencing these challenges and maybe looking for a strategy or a way to just communicate her frustrations to her management or to her leadership, maybe.
Okay. Well, Ebony, as I listened to the comments, there is a saying that my team members and my leadership probably, I said, leaders lead. I always say leaders lead. And in the midst of this George Foreman situation, I was truly angry. I was beyond angry. And I even went to my leadership and I said, well, look, you can't be silent on this. You don't have to have the answer, but you have to show that you care and you're concerned about what's going on. And that was my main concern at that point in time, is that, and I didn't see that. And so you think about that situation, you say, well, how can they not see and understand that? You don't have to necessarily, as a leader, you don't necessarily have to have an answer, but you have to demonstrate that you care about the situation. And it could have been just a simple response that, well, you know, this was a very traumatic situation, very unfortunate, and I don't know how to handle it, but together we can actually try to get through this. And I think that's what that individual really wanted to hear, is that in my workplace, you know, I'm dedicated. You see me every day, I'm here, but just that simple acknowledgement would make a big difference in terms of putting you in a better place to deal with the situation at hand. And I'm hoping that kind of touch upon what you may be feeling or think maybe I would be interested to see, based on my response, if that is actually addressing what your concerns may be.
And I'm sorry that you are experiencing it. I know here at our office with our team, we've implemented, you know, mental health days. So if the team is kind of feeling overwhelmed, then they're able to just kind of, you know, give a 24-hour notice to say that they want to take a mental health day. We also have, we are working from home, but do try to, when safely we can get together, try to at least have, you know, some monthly get-togethers where we're still able to build rapport and kind of keep our team camaraderie going, as well as just genuinely checking on one another. So we live by text messages, and so I always try to send the team, you know, a funny leadership, you know, a leadership memes or something motivating, but we also share funny things as well to keep it light, to keep it humorous, to know that work is serious. But as Carl mentioned at the top of the meeting, we spend a lot of time at work, and so work also has to be fun. So just try to also keep it lighthearted and not so serious all the time as well. It's just some things that I do with my team. Okay. So we're gonna move to our next question from Chadwick. Thank you for your question. How can you build psychological safety in open spaces and organizations? So how can you build psychological safety in open spaces and organizations?
Do I go, Tiara, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think it comes in, and I mean, I have my workplace is academia. So I mean, that is one of the things, but I think that there need to be able to have spaces. And I think that those spaces and things that come out of them are not then having negative consequences. I think that being able to have a positive psychological space means that I can show myself and I can say something about myself that is me dealing with trauma or anything. And I don't feel immediately, because of the culture that's been created, that I'm going to have negative consequences for my self-image or for my status or for my career. Like, is being vulnerable in this space something that is going to set me back? And I think that a lot of workplaces unintentionally foster a space where you don't have that psychological vulnerability, and you can't have that space to be able to do something without punishment or humiliation. And so I think that there needs to be structure in place to ensure that people can say things in that space and things aren't going to come out of it, and that that space serves as a safe space, and that if somebody says something out of line during that space, or if someone is humiliating somebody else, that there are then structures and consequences in place so that you don't just have open psychological warfare going on. I think that workplaces need to create, not standards, I can't think of the word, but like procedures, policies, structure, being able to ensure that once you're in that space that people can't just do whatever. Like there needs to be training for the individual and the team on what the group dynamic is like, specifically if it's in a space that's meant to be a safe space. And oftentimes safe spaces are blindly constructed without actual structure to them. And I think that there are things in a checklist you need for it to be a safe space. You can't just create a space and it becomes a safe space. So I think that those are the things that you have to think about too, in fostering that, and being able to create that.
So we can't just go in a room and put a sign on the door and say safe space and it's safe. That's not how that works.
That's not how that works. No.
Okay.
Particularly in an open space, like I think his question was based on an open space.
Right.
And just because it is in a space does not automatically make it an open space. And I think that there needs to be like structure and systemic things put in place of this is what we do in this space and this is what we don't do.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Carl, before I allow, well, you can weigh in on this question if you have something to add, but there was also someone wanted to touch back on your 5 inclusive habits, and they said open, fair, transparent, but they didn't get your other 2.
Okay, well, I'll just, the 5 inclusive habits are actually, I call it focus, not F-O-C-U-S, but F-O-C-S-E, F-O-C-S-E, which actually mean fair, open, cooperative, supportive, and empowering. The new focus.
The new focus. Okay.
The new focus.
I'm gonna put that in the chat for everyone too.
Yeah. And ironically, if you actually work in the federal government, the employee viewpoint survey actually have a segment of, there are about 20 questions included in the federal employee viewpoint survey that speak to inclusiveness. And those are the 5, and it's called the new IQ, which is the inclusion quotient. And so it speaks to those 5 components, the focus and those components, yes.
Okay.
Okay, and back to the other question here. One of the things I want to say that's important, we have to learn the science of environment. And what I simply mean by that, I recall I was working in an office, and I first started in that office. When I walk in, I just didn't have good vibes. And I'm quite sure a lot of you have actually had a situation when you walk into the office, you're like, look, what is it about this place that's not clicking with me? And what I did here, I was new in that office, and it just didn't, the vibes of the office didn't work with me. The lighting was poor. It was dark and poor lighting in the office. The furniture and stuff in there was just dead green colors. All of these things about the office, it just didn't present or produce energy or anything here. It just wasn't there. And so I was up one night and couldn't sleep, and I just came up with a plan, and I presented the plan to my leadership in terms of changing the scheme of the office. We repainted to make the office brighter. We went as far as that we had metal file cabinets. I had those painted nice colors, and even the break rooms just wasn't conducive for individuals to kind of engage. And I actually came up with a color scheme for that, rearranged that break room, and it just kind of created a different vibe in the office and about people And then I actually had to start working on how do we do things to really begin to get people to interact and engage in these spaces and start feeling comfortable. And so it's a process, but there's science out there that talks about things that you can actually do to create an environment that's conducive and that creates energy and positive vibes where individuals can feel comfortable and thrive and be successful in terms of what they actually want to do. And so I think it's important that you research those things and find out what works for you. You know, there are so many things out here that based on science about even just from the whole simple process of going into a grocery store and how things are strategically located. The science is already there. We just have to begin to understand how it works and how it's applicable to us.
Okay, well, we're about to come up on the final of our webinar. This has been a great conversation and went by really fast. I will say, for the sake of our webinar and for the topic at hand is, you know, I would be amiss if I did not plug MANRRS. And so I hope that you all do turn to your local MANRRS chapters and using the local, the National MANRRS organization as a place of support for you and your organizations. So if you are a student that is experiencing challenges, I know as an organization, we don't have professional staff on site, but I did mention that being an organization, we know where resources are. And so if you are experiencing challenges, feel free to reach out to your national officers, your regional officers, reach out to the National MANRRS office. If you're having an internship and you're having trouble and you're in the field and you don't know where to turn and you don't feel comfortable going to your employer, contact your, you know, your MANRRS organization just to say, hey, I don't know how to handle this. Can you help me? And so we look to be a resource to you. We hope that your local chapters are a resource to you. Our student leaders that are out, there was a question about how you can be a resource. Listen, you said take action and point them in the right direction. And if you don't know what direction that is, point them to MANRRS. We hope to be a resource to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. There will be a survey that comes out after this. I would like to share a few slides with you here before we allow you guys to dismiss. And let's see, let me get up here to them. Sorry, I didn't have them loaded. Of course I did. Like I don't do Zoom every day. Here we go. So we just want to share these few slides with you all. And this really goes. So just wanted to remind everyone about our chapter kickoff for students that'll be talking about highlighting a lot of our MANRRS programs, chapter grants. You do have to attend to be eligible for a lot of the programs, scholarships, and grants that'll be coming out this year. So please make sure your advisor and your officer team, your e-board, or some representatives from your chapter can be present. It is on a Saturday, and we're gonna be, it's only gonna be a 3-hour event. Also want to save the date for our upcoming professional development series in partnership with the Soil and Water Conservation Society, as well as the Soil Health Institute. The first one to be coming up Thursday, September the 22nd at 6 p.m. Be on the lookout for that save the date and for the registration. I know you can't click the link here, so my apologies for that. Also want to keep in mind of our MANRRS regional clusters that are coming up. You can access these on our website under events from our homepage. The first one kicks off in Atlanta, Georgia, September the 30th through October 1st, where we will be collaborating, cultivating, and motivating the next generation of agriculture leaders. So please come to one of these events for looking for internships, career opportunities. And if you're an employer, if you're looking to promote any of your internships or career opportunities, then this is the place for you. Also, if you're out there and you're new to MANRRS and you're looking to partner with us, here are a few ways in which we partner with organizations by providing access to top talent in the fields of food, ag, natural resources, and other STEM-related fields. Working with your organization as a thought leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion, providing professional development training, not only for students, but for professionals as well. Access to diverse speakers and subject matter experts, You're able to post jobs on the MANRRS website, as well as be a part of our professional membership and network. And one new program that I could list here, you can also serve as a mentor for MANRRS. We just launched our MANRRS Lead program last year, and we'll be looking for industry professionals and others, students as well. If you're looking for mentors, as Carl mentioned, this is a great place for you to get active. Did I freeze? Oh, this is a great place for you to get active. Our quota, our max is 100 students, and it will be available on a first come, first serve. So please, when you see that announcement, sign up. It's a great opportunity. And thank you, and follow us on social media for all of the updated information, announcements, and scholarships. I want to thank our panel, Ms. Tiara Porter and Mr. Carl Butler, for joining us this evening. I appreciate the audience for your questions, and for my team for helping to orchestrate, navigate, and coordinate everything on the back end. And I hope you all have a good evening and a great productive semester and a good rest of the week. Thank you so much for joining us. Good night.